Card games like Slay the Spire, Balatro and Stacklands have been exploding in popularity recently, and in this video series I'm going to show you how to create some fundamentals that can be molded to any type of card game you want to create. My name is Barry, and in this first video I'm going to show you how to create cards and implement the logic for dragging them around the screen. So of course, to get started you're going to need to install Godot. The version I'm using is 4.3, and if you don't have that version you can go into the latest stable downloads and make sure that you're using 4.3, otherwise there might be some slight differences in the tutorial, but you'll still be able to follow along. And so now I have Godot downloaded, I'm going to go ahead and press create new project. Then we'll just give it a project name here and just press create. And so now we're loaded into the Godot editor. We're going to go up here and press 2D scene because we're going to be making a 2D card game. And then we're going to go up here to our node 2D it gave us, and we're going to rename this, and we're just going to call it main. And then if I hit Control S on my keyboard, we can just save this scene, and I'm just going to call it main.tscn. And so our first objective here is we want to get a card rendering to the screen. So we want to right click up here on main, we're going to add child node, and we're going to search for something called sprite 2D, and I'm going to double click it here. And then the next thing we want to do is we need to import a texture. So I have this one I prepared earlier on my desktop that's a knight that was a free asset I found online, and I used a little bit of Photoshop to make it look like a card, and I'll leave that for download in the description along with the original author of the knight. And so now what we can do is we can go ahead and click our sprite 2D here, and now we can just click and drag our knight into the texture property in the inspector. And we're just going to, with our sprite 2D selected, make sure that this centered box is ticked under offset because it's going to be really handy for dragging cards around later. And now we're just going to drag this card into the center of the screen and hit play up here, and we can just pick select current to set this scene as our main scene. And now you can see we've successfully got a card rendering to the screen, and the next thing we want to work on is adding some collision to the card so we can interact with it. But before we do that, I'm going to go up here to main, and I'm going to right click, and I'm actually going to create a child node, and I'm going to create a node 2D, and I'm going to call this card, and this is just to keep all the relevant card nodes in one place. So we can take our sprite 2D here and we'll child it to card, and when we do our collision stuff later we can child it to card as well, just group everything together. And I'm going to rename sprite 2D to card image. Then to get our collision set up, we can right click card, create new node, and we're going to add an area 2D, and this is actually going to give us a warning, and if we look at this it's because it wants some sort of collision. So we're going to right click our area 2D, add child node, and we're going to add a collision shape 2D. And then when we select this collision shape 2D, it's also going to give us a warning just because we have to go over here into the inspector and set this shape property, and we're just going to set it to rectangle 2D. But now you can see our collision nodes are kind of up here in the top left and our card is like away from them. So we're gonna, with our card image selected, click and drag it up here, and we can use this orange crosshair, which is the center of the card, and just make sure it aligns with that X and Y line right there, so everything is centered, including the area 2D and collision shape. And now if you select the collision shape 2D, you can see it gives you these little things that we can stretch and just fit over the card. It probably won't fit perfectly if you have that centered box tick from earlier, but it'll be close enough. So now that that's done, we can actually go ahead and extract card and all the nodes into its own scene. So if we right click and save branch as scene on card and name it card.tscn, you can now see that because we want many cards in our card game, now we just have to take card.tscn, drag it into main, and we've just made a second card. Next, we actually want to add the functionality for being able to drag our cards around. So we need to add a script, and we don't want to add this script onto card itself because then the logic will exist for every card instantiated. So instead, let's go to main, add child node, create a new node 2D, and then we can go ahead and call this card manager. And then for every card we have, we can just child it to card manager. Then I can right click on card manager and I can attach script, and we can just call this card manager. And now inside this script, we want to be able to detect a left click. So I'm going to create a new function called input, and this is actually a function from Godot itself, so make sure that the spelling and everything of this is the same as I have it. And this function is going to take in an event, which is going to be when you left click. And then we're just going to have an if statement here to check if the event is input event mouse button, and if it's a left click, then we're just going to print click. So now if we actually go ahead and run this, and we go ahead and open the output down here, make sure it's open, and if we click in our game view, you're going to see it prints click, but actually it's going to print it twice for one click because it prints when you click and when you release click. So to split those into two separate actions, I'm going to replace that print click with an if statement saying if event.pressed will print left click, and then I'll add an else and we'll print left click released. So let's just run that and make sure it works. So now if we left click in here, we'll print left click down the output, and if we release it, we'll get left click released. And now what we want to do is we want to detect if there's a card when we left click. So down here where we have print left click, I'm just going to add this comment to Raycast check for card. And then down here, we're going to create a new function, or call this function Raycast check for card, but you can call it whatever you want. And this is just going to be some code that I'm basically taking from the Godot documentation, so you can copy this kind of exactly. This is just to set up a Raycast, just to return whatever is under our cursor when we click. So we're going to, basically here the important thing is these parameters that we're creating. We're going to set the parameter of the position to our mouse position, so get global mouse position. And we're going to make sure that collide with areas equals true, because our card collision is an area 2D, and we're going to set our collision mask to 1, and then we can just save this as a variable called result, and we can print that variable. And now we actually have to call this function to get all this code to run. So if we call it up where we have if event.pressed, then when you get a left click, it'll run all this code. So if we run it here and we can test it, you see if I click nowhere, it returns an empty array. And if I click on a card, it looks like it returns a bunch of garbage, but actually we can get the collider in there. You can see it right here. So if we actually go into our card scene up here, you can see this area 2D, this is what it's returning, but we want to be able to get the card. So if we go back into our Raycast function where we're printing the result, let's just print the first returned result, which is just this right here. And then if we go .collider, now we've narrowed it down to get just that area 2D. We've extracted that, and now if we go .getParent, now it should be getting the parent of the area 2D, which you can see is the card. So let's just test that real quick, and if we press play and click on a card, you can see we're now getting a printed reference to that card, which is good. But if we click on nothing, it's going to hard error out here because we're trying to access the first result returned, and if we click on nothing, obviously nothing is going to be returned. So let's fix that real quick by making sure that something is returned. So we're going to add an if condition here, and we're going to say if result.size is greater than 0. So if there is a result, then we will return, and instead of printing all this, we're going to return that card, that reference to that card, and otherwise, if not, we'll return null. So now we need some kind of way for card manager to know if a card is being dragged. So we're going to create a new variable up here at the top called card being dragged. And now, since our Raycast check for card is actually returning something, we can go down here and we can just check if something was returned. So we'll add var card equals the result of Raycast check for card, since it's being returned. And now we'll add an if statement if card. So if something was returned, if a card was clicked, then we will set card being dragged equal to the card, and that's the card that was found in the Raycast. And then instead of printing left click released, we can just replace that with card being dragged equals null. And now we can take this process function that already came with the script, and we're just going to cut it and paste it up here near the top. And the code that runs inside this function, this is another one of Godot's inbuilt functions. It's kind of similar to input, but this code is going to run every single frame. And in here, we're going to check if card being dragged. So if it's not null, then we are going to create a new variable called mouse position, and we're just going to set it to get global mouse position, just because we're going to need to use that later. And we're going to set card being dragged dot position equal to the mouse position. So now we can go ahead and test all this, and you can see if we left click and just drag our mouse around that the card is following the mouse, which is perfect. But there is kind of one weird thing, that the card feels like it's kind of following the mouse a bit sluggish. And this fixes for me if I go into project and then project settings, I'll search for VSync here. I think it's in, yeah, it's in here in display window, VSync mode disabled. It might just be my computer, but when I do this, the card snaps to my mouse really nicely. And so now we're only really left with one glaring issue, and that's if we just take a card and drag it off the screen like this, we can basically never get it back. So to fix that, we can kind of constrain the position of the card to not go below a certain position on the X and Y. So you can see I don't want this card's position to be able to be less than 0 or more than the screen size. So to implement this fix, we're going to go down and we're going to take this ready function that was also provided, same as the process function when we made the script, and we're just going to paste it at the top here of the script. And I'm going to create a new variable called screen size as well. And the code within this ready function is only going to run once, basically when the game starts. So I'm going to set this screen size equal to getViewportRect.size. Then we can replace mouse pos down here. We can set card being dragged.position equal to a new vector2, which is just an XY coordinate. And now this is where the Godot's clamp function is going to come into use. So for the X coordinate, we're going to say clamp, and then we're going to provide our original value, which is mouse position X, and then we're going to use clamp to provide a minimum and maximum constraint. So we're going to provide 0 and then screen size.x for the maximum. Then we can just copy and paste this, do the same for the y, replace those x's to y's, and now put this on a new line as well. Now we can run this one last time to make sure it works, and you can see that the position of the card is clamped and cannot leave the bounds of the screen. Amazing. And one last change I'm going to make, just for the sake of tidiness, is there's this kind of magic floating number down here. This collision mask is set to 1. I'm going to create a new constant called collision mask card, and I'm going to set it to 1. And then I'm going to copy that name, and instead of having just 1 down there in the parameters for the raycast, I'm going to paste that constant. In the next video, I'm going to be showing you how to add this card hover effect here, and I have plenty more videos coming, such as adding a deck, a hand, multiplayer card slots, and more. So if you like this kind of video, subscribe for more, and if you found it helpful, please consider dropping a like, because I'm going to try and grow this channel. Thank you very much.